Okay, so the first thing we'll do here is start by taking off the shroud, and you can see get a bolt right there, bolt right there, come around here, bolt right there, actually nut I should say, and they are 10 millimeters, so we'll start by taking them out. As you can see, the shroud clips into the bottom down there, so once you get the bolts out, it just slides right out of there. So we'll set that aside. Alright, so we'll take a 15 millimeter socket and we'll put it down here on the tensioner pulley, and we'll release that tension. Pull the belt off. Oops. Fun part. Just gonna hold this so I can get the socket out. Release that. And then we'll take the belt out. Alright, there's a couple different ways that you can get the fan off. Let me show you one of them. One of them is to use a tool similar to this, which goes on, basically goes down in here, and there's pinholes on the fan pulley. You can see there's one pinhole right there, and there's another pinhole. And then the pins on this thing go in those pinholes. Now this one doesn't fit. We tried it, but it doesn't fit in this particular configuration. But if you have the right fan removal tool, that'll fit in there. So what we did instead was use a chain wrench to securely go around the pulley, and then you just put a wrench on the nut down there, and we had to hammer it because it's been on there for a while. Get some impact to loosen that nut up, and then you just turn it off. Will that thing loosen by hand at this point, or? You still need the wrench. Now, one of the things they say about the fan is when you store it, to store it vertically, not horizontally, because it's got fluid inside. And they say that you don't want the fluid to flow out of the bearings, I guess. Bottom line is to store it up and down. And we're free. On to the next step. Okay, then the next thing that we did was we removed the 4 bolts that hold down the compressor. We also disconnected this connector, and then there's also a nut that holds this bracket in place, so that all of those things have to come out for the air compressor to be able to move out of the way. The only thing is there's one bolt here, this corner bolt, that won't come out because the tube's in the way of it pulling out, but that's not a problem. You can just leave it in place. And then we'll move that compressor out of the way. Do you want to go ahead and see if you can pull that forward? And then we'll be able to do our next step, which is to get underneath to that bypass hose. See if you can just kind of see where that, you can see the bracket, the clamp for that bypass hose right there. So that's where we're headed next. Alright, so the next thing we're going to do is get after this bracket here that's holding on the alternator. And hopefully we can take off the alternator and the bracket all at the same time. So there are several bolts that hold this bracket on in the front. Most notably though, there's one hidden behind this pulley. I'm kind of in the middle of taking that pulley off. And then the other thing not to forget is to take off this bolt that's holding on the dipstick, just to get that out of the way. And then once we do that, this whole bracket should just come out as one piece, like I said, hopefully with the alternator still attached to it, and we'll find that out here in a minute. Okay, so now that we got this pulley off, you can see one of these last bolts down here. That's right, this one doesn't come out because this guy is in the way. So let's take this guy out right here. You know what? I think what we'll do is we'll take Junior off over here first. Take this bolt off here. Make dipstick so that it doesn't get damaged. Alright, so travel here, we can get that sucker off a little easier. Alright. Allow that to move when you get the bracket out. Boy, I have butterfingers today. So I kind of started loosening this bolt down here, and you can see already that the whole bracket is loose. So we'll take this out the rest of the way. What did I say? I'm total butterfingers today. Let's see if we can roll this baby out. Go. And this should come out of there fairly simply. So then we'll have to take this guy off here on the back. And this guy too, if you can see that. And we'll do that and come back, take the bracket out. Where'd that connector go? So there's that connector that we pulled out of the back. And then there's just this bolt, this nut that holds this cable on. Take that sucker out. It's not free. And there we go. Bracket and alternator all as one piece. So as you can see here, we've had a long-term leaking problem right around the thermostat. Let's see if I can zoom in there for you. Oop, too far. You can see how it's been leaking off this corner. In fact, if I can pick this stuff enough, you might actually see some leak there. Anyway, but you can see by the corrosion here, it's been leaking for a while. So we're going to get that off, clean this all up and replace it. I also took this heater hose while I'm here. Took this heater hose, it goes around to the back, took that off and get that replaced. And then while we've taken the time to be under here, we'll also replace the bypass hose, which is also notorious for leaks. Doesn't appear to be leaking right now, but you never know. So we'll go from there. Now, if you were in here and you did want to take the water pump off, and I actually already replaced mine a couple times ago, and unfortunately we're revisiting this area, but if you do want to replace your water pump, it's actually pretty simple from this point on. You just got, I believe there's 7 bolts. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, and then there's, I think, 3 yet underneath here. 1, I can feel 1, 2, so there might only be 6, but I'm not exactly sure. No, there are 7. So yeah, there's 1, 2, 3, 4. Then there's 1 right under here, and then there's 2 that you can't see that are under this pulley. So that's 7. And bam, you've got your water pump off and replacing. So other than having to take off this whole top bracket, I mean, once you get there, you've got access to everything that you need. Alright, so next step is taking the thermostat housing off and taking the thermostat out and getting that mating surface there nice and clean. Actually, you also want to get the housing mating surface nice and clean too, but you just take a nice straight blade and I'm going to get on that surface and make sure that all the residual is off. And I've already worked this pretty good. Got a little bit back here to do yet. This is like the toughest spot. I'm going to use some RTV, but you can never get it too clean, so I want to make sure all these surfaces nice and smooth. And from there we can start putting it back together. Of course, we'll put the hoses on and go from there. Alright, so we've got the thermostat in. You can see that. Make sure you put it in with the spring side down. See that? Alright. And then we're going to take the gasket and we're going to coat it with some high temperature RTV. Do that right now. We're going to coat both sides. Try and do a nice thin, even coating. So I got the gasket coated on both sides. You can see that. So then we'll take it and we'll put it on the housing. And just get it generally centered so that we can put the housing then. Now if you'll notice, there's a little tab right there. See that little tab? That's got to be to the front. And then the other thing too is, and I should have shown you this before, but if you can zoom in there, there's a little dimple in here. There's also a little dimple on this thing. When we put this on, that dimple will fit in there and kind of lock this in from twisting. That's why this tab has to be to the front. Just seat that down there. Put our first bolt in. Back, that second bolt, a little hard to see, so my hand is going to be in the way. Extension there to push this down. Now we're going to start by just kind of like finger tightening it, finger snugging it into place. Then for this engine, for the 3.9 liter V6, the torque spec is 200 inch-pounds. And that's what we'll do next. So after you've got the thermostat housing torqued down to 200 inch-pounds, you'll notice that the RTV squeezes out the edges. That's the way you want it. And while we're away here, I also put in the new bypass hose. So the next thing is to put on the new heater hose, and then we'll be ready to go back the other direction. Start putting on the big pieces again. Okay, so the next thing is to take the old upper heater hose and replace it with a new one. So we'll have to take out the clamps and take off this heat guard here and then cut this sucker to size, and then we'll reinstall it. And there you go. Everything is swapped and ready to go back in. By the way, I keep calling this the upper heater hose. When you go to order it, they actually call it the heater to engine hose. So now we'll go ahead and put this back in. Alright, so the heater to engine hose right there is back on. So everything's back on. So now the next thing we'll do is we'll put back on the bracket for the alternator and the air conditioning compressor. Alright, so I got the AC compressor back in. I don't know if you can see this bolt back here. This is one of these stem bolts. It actually has two nuts on it, and I'm showing you this because I put it back on and realized I had it upside down. There's a nut underneath, and then there's a nut on the top yet too. That holds this at the right height so that everything, believe it or not, this little clamp here makes everything kind of fit really nice. So when you go to put it back together, that you're not struggling. Just make sure you have that sucker on right. So the next thing we'll do is we'll put the fan back on. Alright, as you can see, we've got everything back together and we've actually filled up the antifreeze, and everything on the top here looks good, but we discovered a second problem, and I'll show you that right now. The return tube. This is a classic problem with Dodges. This return tube down here, anytime you move it or have to mess with it, if you have to move that O-ring, then the O-ring has a chance of starting to leak, which is what happened in this case. So we're going to go ahead and replace that next to finish this job, hopefully. Okay, so I decided to get a new tube because this tube was actually relatively inexpensive, and it comes with the proper O-ring fitted to it. So one of the things we're going to do to make sure this doesn't happen again is put some RTV on this. Just want a nice even light coat. This is some high heat RTV. Give it that extra measure of sealing. There we go. So the second trick to doing this is, if you can see the bolt here, we're going to leave this bolt in place, and then what that'll do is when we go to insert this, this piece right here will catch on that bolt and prevent us from pushing it in too far, and then we'll tighten that up and leave that in place before we put the hose back on. And the reason for that is because if you push it in too far and then you have to pull it out, that's going to damage the O-ring. You kind of want to get it in the first time. Okay, so now we got that in there. You can see that the RTV has smooshed up around the hole. And all we'll need to do is tighten that bolt down and then put the hose back on, and hopefully we'll have a leak-free situation. Well, there you have it. The last leak is now fixed. So we're just running it up to temperature with the heater in the car on full heat. That way it'll get the antifreeze cycling through the entire system. Then we'll open up the fill cap, top it off, make sure it's got no bubbles in it, no air in it, and we are done. I just got to put the cowling on to cover the fan, and good to go.